What's Pro Football Focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stones.
Am I going to get sued?
You got legal on this?
Let's send you out on the right note. PFF sucks. Have a great day, everybody.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube. And today, Sam, we're giving you some reasons for concern. Reasons for concern
The Pessimism Show.
for all 32 teams.
Here is where I come to the fore.
Yeah, this is your time to shine.
I did my best with the Positivity Show, with the Optimism Show, you know? But I think people could see through it.
Yeah, it wasn't the same.
No.
Wasn't the same guy.
Here, it's just natural.
Your
right?
optimism still comes across
like
pessimistically.
Yeah, it's like a learned skill versus one that's just instinct.
So I'll just, it'll be like word association. I'll name a team, and then you'll just, react accordingly.
Right.
Which is with negativity.
Yeah.
And are we live? Oh, yeah, of course we're working on Memorial Day. Yeah. Completely live. Here, I'm not doing anything else.
Ew.
But happy Memorial Day to everybody.
We've done it again. So we have this irritating habit of showing up wearing the same outfits. Like, we're here coordinated in gray again.
What are the odds that, I didn't know you were going to wear a gray shirt today.
Right. When was the last time I've worn a gray T-shirt on this show? Like, this is stupid.
I'm wearing
This is
grays
old,
and blacks and blues every day.
This is old married couple behavior, and it's happening too often between you and I, and it's concerning me.
If I show up in a rugby kit,
Right.
then
we're screwed.
yeah, we're in a lot of trouble. But first off, as a busy parent, you want to give your kids a head start in their financial future, but investing can often be both confusing and time-consuming. But Fabric by Gerber Life makes it easy for you to set up an investment account for your child that grows with them and helps prepare for their financial future. Fabric by Gerber Life was designed by parents for parents to make it easy to plan for and manage your family's financial path. With a UGMA account from Fabric, you can start investing in your child's future today. A UGMA stands for Uniform Gifts to Minors Act. So while your kids can invest while they're minors, a UGMA account allows you to invest on their behalf and gives their investments more time to grow. So join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to help protect their family. Start investing in your child today at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. Portfolio is managed by Fort Washington Investment Advisors, Inc. Additional services provided by Apex Clearing Corporation. All investing is subject to risk. Monthly minimum contribution required. Learn more at meetfabric.com. All right, man, we're going to go team by team, just like we did last week on the Reasons for Optimism show.
Yeah, and a reminder, these shows are somewhat tongue-in-cheek, you know? There's
It's what they turned into.
some comedy in there. Now, look, there's a kernel of truth to all these things. We're not, like, inventing the optimism or concern. But they are over-egged a little bit for comedy effect. The other thing is...
We need a disclaimer. Always at the bottom.
Yeah, joke
Comedy.
show. Remember...
Sarcasm font.
We're in the off-season. So we're experimenting. If you have ideas of what we can do for shows this offseason, NFL podcast at pff.com. Down there in the bottom right, if you're watching on YouTube or if you're just listening, it's that address I just read out, NFL podcast at pff.com. Send us ideas of what we can do. For example, we did your draft watch-along the other day, which was such a great idea that YouTube took it down.
So far. You
think they'll reinstate it?
Sure, we could fight to get it back up again. The audio still worked.
Yeah, I don't think they can take that down. So when we told the audio people that, hey, this might be the show to watch,
we should,
as long as you got it in the first hour.
We should double down and try another one.
Yeah.
I think
a good idea is that you and I stream playing Madden for an hour or whatever.
Would you want to watch us play Madden?
Yeah. And then because
build a franchise in Madden.
Yeah, but it's like, well, we could build our franchises.
Yeah.
That's how we could do the franchise draft. The franchise.
Oh, we're going to play with
the
our
expansion team, right? That will let us prep for the college football game that's coming out in mid-July. We could stream that live on the day. I think it comes out on a Friday. We could show up and like today, maybe.
Oh man, I used to
show up on a Friday, wreck house.
I used to make sure no matter where I was in the country, even when I was playing minor league baseball, I was there for the NCAA release day.
I think
Madden release day.
I think if we were playing Madden using our expansion teams, we should also each be allowed to create ourselves on the team.
Oh, I love that.
So you 6'10", you DeForest Buckner size, and me, whoever it is, Tank
What
Dell.
position would I play tight end here?
It's up to you.
What would you play?
It would have to be receiver, right? At that size, receiver. I mean, DB or receiver. I'm normal size.
I like this. Now I like that
DBs.
idea. Now I got to practice. I haven't played religiously in a while. I'm too realistic of a Madden player. I don't like to cheat the game. I like to run the ball, set up play action, run the real plays that the team plays. It's not good for winning.
Okay.
It's just good for realism. All right, you ready to get into this?
Let's go.
Team by team. We'll start in the AFC East with the Buffalo Bills. Reasons for concern for the Buffalo Bills.
They traded away their best receiver. They replaced him with a guy that isn't an X receiver that they're planning on playing at X receiver. They have 17 different slot options and no X receiver.
Yeah, they lost all their good players.
Yeah,
Can't win the big one.
So the slot options are great. Don't get me wrong. Dalton Kincaid, Curtis Samuel, Khalil Shakir. I think these are all good slot options. James Cook out of the backfield, but those outside perimeter wide receivers, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who just put up like less than 500 yards playing with Patrick Mahomes, Keon Coleman, who, as we said, a lot of red flags in his tape coming out of college, maybe projects best to being a big slot in the NFL. Mac Hollins, your guy. I mean, he's nice as a 4 or 5, but you don't want him as your X starting receiver. And then Chase Claypool. Every year it's going to be, is this the year Chase Claypool puts it together? And the answer will always be no.
A lot of receivers that I used to like.
Yeah.
That haven't been great.
So it reminds me a lot of that Colts receiver group a few years ago, where you're like, you can paint an optimistic picture where maybe everybody's got it wrong on Keon Coleman and he becomes that guy. Or Khalil Shakir takes a step forward and becomes a completely different receiver absent Stephon Diggs. Or this is the year Chase Claypool puts it together. Yada, 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 right? But the chances are it's not going to work, and you're going to have to probably change the offense fundamentally because they don't have that perimeter X receiver threat.
And then their biggest non-Josh Allen investment, Von Miller, coming off by far the worst year of his career. When he was on the field, 53 grade, and then was only on the field for 309 snaps, hasn't even played 800 snaps over the last 2 years. So that big go-for-it move prior to the 2022 season, getting Von Miller, hasn't paid off.
And even when you didn't have these question marks, you still couldn't get over the hump and get past, the other AFC teams and get to the Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl. So it doesn't feel like this is Buffalo's year.
Yeah, probably a 2-win season here for the Bills. I'm just kidding. We're just joking. We're just highlighting some reasons for concern. That's all we're doing. That's all we're doing.
We need
if you don't like it, go to the Optimism Show.
The way people have, like a soundboard where you hit the button. We need a button that you can hit that shows joke flashes across the screen.
Yeah, because my jokes, they're not always clear.
No,
you see. Good for the Bills.
Yeah.
All right, Miami Dolphins.
The Miami Dolphins. They keep collapsing late in the season.
Can't win in the cold.
Can't win in the cold.
How are they going to win in the cold?
Fair weather team.
Couldn't beat a good team last year, except Dallas. But Dallas can't beat good teams
either. They
either.
also couldn't be. Yeah, right. The only good team they could beat was the other good team that couldn't beat good teams.
Yeah. So how's Miami going to actually beat good teams this year? They're going to beat up on the bad teams.
My reason for concern for them is still kind of rooted in the offensive line. Teron Armstead is their best offensive lineman by a distance, and you're probably only going to get 75% of the season out of him in any given year. They got the insurance policy of Patrick Paul so that at least they have an option when he goes down. But starting offensive lineman right now, Liam Eichenberg or Isaiah Wynn at left guard, that's problematic, whoever it is. Robert Jones, Robert Hunt is gone. Robert Jones at right guard. Aaron Brewer at center, Austin Jackson at right tackle. Austin Jackson's coming off a career year, and the career year was still average at best. So you've got 75% of a good offensive lineman at left tackle, pending whatever Patrick Paul turns out to be. Probably 2 weak spots at guard, a question mark at right tackle, and Aaron Brewer at center.
The one thing I'll add is the interior defensive line. They lose Christian Wilkins. They're going to try to replace him in the aggregate, a guy that's played a ton of snaps, moves around the line when needed. Zach Sealer's really good there, but the other players slated for significant playing time at defensive tackle. You got Jonathan Harris, Neville Gallimore, Deshaun Hand, Tier Tart, who could be really good, right? He has been really good with the Titans, kind of tapered off and wore out his welcome in Tennessee last year. There are some question marks up front, and I don't know if this Dolphins defense is going to be one of those teams that has they've got flashy pass rushers and coverage players like Jalen Ramsey. Love that. But are they the team that just is going to get gashed for the against the run for 150 yards in some big games? I think that's a reason for concern as well.
Yeah, I mean, it goes, the interior and the defensive line goes from a strength to a weakness with that one move with Christian Wilkins leaving.
There you go. We're flying through this. Let's go. Let's keep it crisp. New England Patriots. Reasons for concern.
Their offense is still bad on paper. They just put a rookie quarterback into the worst situation of the rookie quarterbacks this year, and the last couple of seasons has sort of shown really acutely if that quarterback is in a bad situation, his chances of single-handedly overcoming that are pretty minimal. I mean, Bryce Young last season looked horrendous in a bad situation. Justin Fields was set up to fail and failed in a bad situation. Drake May, he ended up being quite a polarizing prospect. You know, a lot of people, most people, in fact, ended up souring on him the longer it went on. And then there were guys like Nate Tice, you know, leading the charge to say he's still arguably the best quarterback in this entire class. But he steps into this team that ends up being the NFL equivalent of his college offense, right? Where you didn't have the help that these other guys had. And that kind of produced this inconsistent, questionable body of work relative to these other quarterback prospects. So if he couldn't overcome it in college, is he going to overcome it year one as a rookie?
Plus, Drake May doesn't even have the best arm on the team. Doesn't even have the best arm among the rookies on the team. They got Joe Milton. Yeah. Joe Milton's going to make him look bad. And throwing laser beams all over the place.
Plus, Jacoby Brissett is a designated Hail Mary quarterback. So
and you got a Hail Mary.
He might have the third best arm on the team.
Is Jacoby Brissett the only quarterback in NFL history to be a designated Hail Mary and designated QB sneak
Probably.
quarterback?
Yeah.
Very special role in the NFL for Jacoby Brissett. The other concern that I'll raise is on the defensive side of the ball. You know, again, a lot of our offseason analysis is like, let's look at the two deep here and let's see what they have as far as established players. The two deep for New England on the defense is okay. It's not bad. But last year, even when everything was falling apart, remember they were losing games like 10-7 and 6-0, and they were playing well defensively.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to give credit to Bill Belichick, I think,
yes,
for keeping that side of the ball.
Belichick is getting blamed for everything in New England, but the one thing I think that remained true is that defense still had teeth right up until the last Belichick day. Right now, I mean, I saw a quote from Keon White saying he loved being coached by Belichick. Like Belichick, he loved the fact that Belichick coached him hard and was a hard-ass coach. And then he was sort of at the end, he's like, but Gerard Mayo's good too. But if Mayo doesn't have that ability to do what the Belichicks did, they are only left with the lowest ranking of the Belichicks.
Right.
So if
two-thirds of the Belichicks are out.
If the higher-ranking Belichicks move the needle here, then the defense might not be as good as it's been. And that's been the only functional part of the franchise for the last couple of years.
Just highlighting it as a reason for concern.
It is a reason for concern.
For the Patriots.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the New York Jets. Reasons for concern for the Jets.
Rodgers is now a year older and coming off a busted Achilles. Like last year, it was all sunshine and roses because you got this quarterback. All he was coming off was a couple of down years, or one down year, right? Where it's like, but if you give him a good situation again, he's only a year removed from back-to-back MVP caliber seasons. Well, now he's another year older than that, and he's coming off an Achilles injury. That's not great.
And then the other guys that they've got surrounding him, they've got the name value, Mike Williams, Tyron Smith, but, they've got their own injury concerns as well. Are they going to be able to stay healthy?
We're conditioned to this world now because of Tom Brady, where we think quarterbacks can just keep going forever, right? But 3 quarterbacks in NFL history have had good quality seasons at the age of 40 or above, right? Tom Brady several times, Drew Brees, and 1 year of Brett Favre.
Was Favre 39 or 40 in that year?
He at least turned 40. He was at least good when he was 40.
Yeah.
But the point being, we assume just because we've seen Brady do it for years that this is fine. But if Rodgers has a good year this year, it would be a significant outlier in historical terms. It's just that it's coming hot on the heels of several of them by Brady.
There's still a trend that needs to be bucked there,
right? With
Rodgers,
it would still be
and last year he lasted 4 snaps,
and that's before you get to the idea of coming off an Achilles injury and the fact that he hasn't really played with this group.
Defensively, I think they'll still be fine. They've been fine for the last couple of years. If I had to highlight a reason for concern, defense is a little bit less stable from year to year. And the Jets, if you're just looking at it analytically, back-to-back years of very good defenses, can they keep that up? We know that there are times when it's just difficult to be able to limit the explosive plays like they've done, to rush the passer the way they have. I think the talent is still there, but just the general nature of defensive regression, that's always a possibility even when the talent is there on the Jets defense.
And you can do this with, most units in the NFL, but this offense is also like a Garrett Wilson injury away from looking pretty ropey. Like, the receiver core looks great as long as Garrett Wilson is there. If Garrett Wilson gets hurt, now you're like Mike Williams coming off injuries, Alan Lazard, who just isn't good enough at that level to be a high, an impact playmaker, and the rest of the receiving core. Like, again, it's a little unfair because you can do that for most units in the NFL. You need those guys, but they do need them.
Yeah, they're kind of lacking speed on that on the offense as well. I mean, Garrett Wilson has that explosive play, big playability, but Mike Williams, Lazard, they're different style players, a little bit slower, so maybe the lack of speed as well as a reason for concern for the Jets.
And their offensive coordinator, Nathaniel Hackett, still going to be calling plays, still going to be the guy. Now,
he's got jokes.
This is not the optimism show, but if you wanted to spin that positively, right, you would say that they're giving the gig to the guy that they know Aaron Rodgers will overrule every time. Yeah. If you put somebody else in there would be the risk that Rodgers wouldn't want to overrule him, and you might actually have to run what he was calling. With Hackett in there, you know full well that if Rodgers doesn't like it, he's just not going to run it. So,
Hackett's got good wit without splits with Rodgers.
But I would say
Rodgers.
that as a general concept, if your selling point on this as a relationship is the quarterback will happily overrule the bad calls.
He's enough of a pushover that Rodgers will overrule him.
Like, the quarterback will happily overrule the bad calls that are being sent in from the sideline. I don't think that's a great starting point.
All right, let's go to reasons for concern in the AFC North, starting with the Baltimore Ravens.
They completely kind of tore down that offensive line over the offseason. And okay, they rebuilt it reasonably well on paper. But we know that there is value to continuity on the offensive line. There's value to just returning the same guys you can any given year. And now you look at that group, there's a lot of question marks. Ronnie Stanley hasn't been the same player since his injuries. Okay, they've ensured that with Josh Jones as a signing there. But at least one guard spot is a complete question mark. The other is Ben Cleveland, who hasn't been as good as they expect him to be. Tyler Linderbaum is really good at center. And then Patrick McCarry is good in a kind of, utility offensive lineman, capable starter way. But is he as good as the great Morgan Moses?
No.
We talk about Patrick McCarry is good, not great.
Yeah, or Roger Rosengarten coming in. I mean, there's just more questions along the offensive line that probably didn't need to happen. And then you've just got Mike McDonald's out, right?
Yes.
Boy Wonder is out of there. And it's not just Boy Wonder. It's all sorts of other defensive coaches and front office personnel. Like, the Ravens are crumbling. They're crumbling right now. So there are reasons for concern here.
And they're still, you can make the same wide receiver argument for them that you can with Buffalo in terms of where's their number one? Where's their X guy? Like, Rashad Bateman hasn't been that player.
We're in year 4 of Rashad Bateman May hype, hyping him up in the offseason.
Zay Flowers is more of a manufactured gimmick target. You can give him high volume, but it's not going to look like that number one X guy. Maybe Tez Walker can be that guy, but he would be a rookie mid-round pick doing it. That's not, it's not the most optimistic thing in the world.
Going back to the defense again, Justin Madubuike coming off of his career year, but was it really as good as all the, however many sacks he ended up with? 77 PFF grade, which is good, not great. They paid him great type of money. So, yeah, I don't know if they're going to be able to replicate what they did last year in the regular season before they kind of collapsed in the AFC Championship. Did the Ravens get worse this offseason? Could be a reason for concern here.
And like basically that entire division, pretty tough schedule.
Yeah, if you're talking reason for concern for the next 3 teams here in the AFC North, is they all have to play each other. So they're all in a very difficult division, probably the best in football. So let's go reasons for concern here for the hometown Cincinnati Bengals.
Is Joe Burrow now injury prone?
It might be his hair. It might be the hair decision here.
The hair.
Looking like Anakin here.
Looking like Anakin Skywalker.
Do we have the Joe Burrow picture that we can fire up there? That's like quarterbacks go through this mid-career crisis sometimes, and I don't know if it works out. I mean, Brady went with the long hair one year, won MVP. Yeah, so could go either way.
Did he ever win a ring with that hair?
No rings with the hair.
Right.
He only he kind of rocked it for 1 or 2 years here.
Yeah.
So no rings with the hair.
The hair for Brady was like his most productive period, but the period that also coincided with not winning the rings. It was like the hair was when he was getting Eli'd, right?
No, they got ousted by the Jets in 2010.
But 2011,
couldn't even make the AFC Championship.
Didn't he still have it in 2011?
I don't know. It was a little bit less. I know Joe Burrow's stylist.
Oh yeah,
too. A friend's son. Friend's son cuts Joe's hair, unless he's moved on.
Right.
I mean, look at that. This is dark side type stuff.
Is that real?
This is dark side type stuff.
That's not a Photoshop?
No, that's it. That's real, right? Oh, it's not?
Right.
Oh, I bought it.
Yeah. See,
I knew. Man. We need to let's just cut that whole thing out.
No, I think he does have more flow than previously, but it's not like that's not real.
All right, let's reset. Cincinnati Bengals. Reasons for concern for the Bengals.
I think Joe Burrow's health is a legitimate reason for concern. Apparently, that injury that he had. Remember that his injury was weird, right? It was just like he threw the ball and then was like, "Oh, my hand's destroyed. My wrist is broken now. Like I can't actually throw this thing anymore." And that was him done. That apparently, according to Dr. David Chow, was a completely unprecedented injury for a quarterback. They'd never
rare
seen
injury.
Not literally unprecedented. It had never happened to a quarterback. That specific injury, whatever the hell he did to his wrist, they'd never seen it before for a quarterback.
So is Joe that fragile?
Now he did say that they expect him back 100%, and it shouldn't be a problem going forward. But that has never happened to a quarterback before, apparently. So now you had that, you had the calf injury. The injuries are starting to stack up for him, and they need him.
Yeah, so I think that's definitely an area for concern. I would say on the defensive side of the ball, do they have enough rushing the passer opposite Trey Hendrickson? They lose DJ Reader. They're trying to replace him in the aggregate. I don't know if they're prepared to do that right away with just Sheldon Rankins and Chris Jenkins coming in, different types of players. You don't really have that big-bodied nose tackle type to replace a Reader on the defensive side of the ball. They had to go back to Von Bell even later in his career where he's lost a step. That's how bad communication and everything was in the secondary. So you're kind of leaning on a lesser talented player at this point in his career in Von Bell just to make sure that everybody's in the right place.
I think the cornerback room is also looking a little bit iffy now.
You lay off DJ Turner.
DJ Turner expected to take a step forward now, and they need him to, but that was not a great rookie performance. Cam Taylor-Britt is a nice number 2 guy, but he might be your best corner now. Dax Hill, they don't seem to know quite what to do with him. He seems to be moving back to corner. Mike Hilton obviously is really good in the slot, but those outside corners are now starting to look like a weak part of this roster.
Overall, pretty optimistic about the Bengals, though.
Trey Hendrickson's not happy either.
Yeah, he's fine. He
just wants more money.
I mean, don't we all?
Sure.
Don't we all?
I'm just saying,
just threaten retirement.
One of your best players being unhappy is not a good thing.
Retirement. I would also say that the interior of the offensive line, maybe they're still not great. I like the moves that they made a couple years ago. They're still fine. They're in creep back toward average territory, but they have some rough games in there as well. So let's move on. Cleveland Browns. Reasons for concern for the Browns.
Their quarterback hasn't played good football since they gave him the most onerous contract in the entire NFL.
Yeah,
and arguably in NFL history.
He honestly hasn't played well since COVID.
Yeah,
since the COVID year, since 2020. Deshaun Watson.
Right. He hasn't played good football since the last year he played well for the Texans before COVID, before all the allegations shut him down and then got him traded. And if he doesn't, the Browns are really going to struggle to win.
For all the reasons for optimism that we had for the Browns and all the compliments that we threw around their team building effort, their ability to build depth, there's not a whole lot of position units that you don't feel really good about with the Browns. Like, you feel good about this entire roster. It could be all for naught if Deshaun Watson does not play better. And I don't know that Joe Flacco, like, be careful the way I say this. Did Joe Flacco play better than Deshaun Watson? Well, I know he got better results, and he created more big plays. He got away with some turnover-worthy plays that we've forgotten, right? That's part of the evaluation here. But Joe Flacco seemed to unlock this offense much better than Deshaun Watson did.
Deshaun Watson had a PFF grade last year of 67.3, which put him behind Kenny Pickett, who the Steelers were so unimpressed by they moved on from unceremoniously in year 2.
That's a reason for concern.
Yeah. So,
and he's got the same injury concerns. He was banged up.
Right. Like, didn't play much.
All sorts of shoulder injuries and everything going on.
And unlike Kenny Pickett, he is on the single most objectionable contract in NFL history. Like, this is, like, if he does not take a huge step forward next year, it's almost an unwinnable situation for the Browns. Like, you need better quarterback play than that if you're going to pay him that kind of money, and you are stuck paying him that kind of money because of that contract.
Speaking of Kenny Pickett, the Pittsburgh Steelers moved on from him. Reasons for concern for the Steelers?
If the combination of Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith becomes terrible, like if that's chemistry that just doesn't work, and you end up with the worst of both, Russell Wilson, who refuses to work the middle of the field, with an offense that only works the middle of the field with players that you don't want catching the ball, and you just get the word, like, it somehow creates this distillation of awful.
I would say, so just Russell Wilson, Justin Fields generally, right? We've complimented good process in getting there, paying them pennies on the dollar relative to other quarterback rooms. However, that still might not matter in wins and losses, because we're still talking about two quarterbacks who, if you were stacking them up against the rest of the NFL, probably rank in the 20s. They're in the bottom half of the league rather than the top half of the league. So that's the rest of the roster is going to have to overcome, unless you get Russell Wilson back to what he was, or Justin Fields to what people thought he could be, in addition to the receiver room kind of being depleted, right? You traded Deontay Johnson. Do you have a good enough replacement for him? You've got third-rounder Roman Wilson. You've got Van Jefferson, Quez Watkins. They're trying to replace him in the aggregate. Those are all the concerns, right? You're trying to replace a good player in the aggregate here in the concerns show. But the receiver room looks like the worst the Steelers have had in a few years now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Russell Wilson, Arthur Smith thing could go in a number of different directions. Like, we don't quite know how that combination is going to work. It could end up being really positive, and actually Arthur Smith's offense is the perfect system.
Don't get too optimistic here.
For Russell Wilson to get the best version of him out whatever's left, to get the best version of it. But if it goes south, there is that world where it's actually the worst possible offense you could plug Russell Wilson into. And we've already seen previously that if you put him into a system that he's not, happy with, or that is not designed to kind of hide his flaws and play to his strengths, it can look terrible. So if that happens, and suddenly you've got this world where like design plays over the middle for Quez Watkins, and instead Russell Wilson like turns down two open guys, tries to escape, like heave a ill-conceived deep ball downfield for George Pickens in double coverage, doesn't feel like it's going to go great.
Their whole season is going to come down to George Pickens and his contested catch variability here.
Yeah.
Defensively, we've got Cameron Hayward coming off of his lowest graded season in about 8 years. Got some contract issues. He was the class of 2011. Rest in peace to that draft video.
Which you would know if you caught that video in the first hour and a half.
So Hayward's upset here during the offseason. Maybe some questions in the secondary. Cornerback opposite Joey Porter Jr. They bring in Dante Jackson. You got Josiah Scott. It's not a great cornerback room on paper. So just a few of the reasons for concern here for the Steelers. All right, let's move on to the AFC South and the Houston Texans. Reasons for concern for the Texans.
Variability. What if last year was simply the high water mark and they caught lightning in a bottle, and this approach of, we can win it all this year. Let's go get Donnell Hunter. Let's go get Stephon Diggs. Let's go get these players that can win now. What if they're actually not as far ahead as they looked, or if we thought they were, Like a sort of not as obvious. Like the Giants were clearly fake, fool's gold. The Giants were clearly fool's gold when they went on that ridiculous run, beat the Vikings in the playoffs, and then decided, actually, we're a good team. We can give Daniel Jones a big contract. We can keep Saquon Barkley around. We can get even better next year. Obviously, they were fool's gold that year, right? And anybody outside of the building knew that and was like, dude, no, don't do that. The Texans are not that. They were clearly better than the Giants were in their corresponding years. But there is a chance that we just saw, a really high-end version of what C.J. Stroud is going to be. We got we were saying it all last year. He's just Georgia C.J. Stroud all the time. What if he isn't? What if he got that for a run and we're going to get a different version of him this year? And now you just invited a guy like Stephon Diggs into the building who, brings some chemistry issues with him, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about Stroud, one of the most impressive rookie seasons we've ever seen. However, in the last 10 to 12 years, we've seen impressive rookie seasons like RG3 in year one, again, in the Shanahan scheme or derivatives. Bobby Slowick was there for RG3's rookie season. Then it all fell apart in 2013. You also have Baker Mayfield had his best season for a while. Like his rookie season was his best season for, until last year, basically. So there is always that possibility of regression from C.J. Stroud. And that's the other thing, too. It's right, like defenses adjust, right? It's not just about you played well, therefore you will forever. Now there's
tape on you.
Yeah, there's the tape and there's the counter argument that the defense gets to bring to the table here this year, and you got to have answers to that. And now I would say stylistically, the way Stroud plays, I feel good about, he's going through his reads, goes 1 to 2 to 3, throws the ball accurately. I mean, he's got the ingredients to be able to adjust to what defenses throw at him. Just saying, we're on the reasons for concern show here, and we have to raise those. And then I would say specifically cornerback 2, opposite Derek Stingley.
Right.
They're going with Jeffrey Okudah, C.J. Henderson, draft Kamari Lassiter. It's a big question mark, I would say, heading into camp.
Yeah, no, definitely. And to be honest, Derek Stingley played fantastically last year, but he was worse the previous year, and we know cornerback volatility being what it is. I mean, Derek Stingley might not have as good a year as he did last year. Then you might have a guy, your top corner isn't playing great. Your second corner is a big question mark anyway, and the entire cornerback group looks like a problem at that point.
And we have to highlight the offensive line. Again, every friend of Kyle seems to be able to overcome offensive line. Poor offensive lines on paper. The Texans did it last year as well, but I wouldn't say it's a position of weakness. Kendrick Green at guard coming back, Titus Howard at right tackle, Shaq Mason getting a little bit older. So there are still some questions up front for the Texans.
No, agreed. I mean, that offensive line, it's hard to know actually with these Shanahan offensive lines. Like, do we just need to accept that they're able to make things work with significantly worse looking groups on paper than other teams can, and kind of stop harping on it? Because it seems like we've been doing that for the 49ers, the Dolphins, and the Texans now for a while, and all three of those teams are arguably the three best offenses in football working with those offensive lines. Like, at some point we should probably recognize that it's just not a thing, or they're all ticking time bombs waiting for one of them to detonate.
All right, let's go to the Indianapolis Colts. Reasons for concern for the Colts.
I mean, I guess we still don't know what Anthony Richardson is yet.
Yeah.
We got a few games and they looked, encouraging, but it's not like they were overwhelming that, we've seen, a couple of games, 3-4 games from young players, and those have sort of set you off in a misleading direction, right? Sam Darnold's put it all together. It's his time. Next year he's going to be amazing. Richardson didn't even show that. Right? They weren't even like overwhelming 3 or 4 games. We were like, okay, he's definitely the guy. We're set. We're good. We saw some flashes. We saw some potential. And then he got hurt and Gardner Minshew came in and was arguably better for last year. So, if Richardson is not the player that he flashed or threatened to be, then, you rewind a bit and you sort of go, okay, we're talking about maybe the most impressive athlete to come into the NFL at the quarterback position ever. The last one of those guys you would identify probably would have been Cam Newton, who, again, if you'd seen the video before it got taken down, you would know. You go back to that Auburn season, Cam Newton on his own basically dragged Auburn to a national title and just was completely unstoppable individually. Forget who he was throwing to, forget anybody else. Cam Newton on his own turned Auburn into a national champion. Richardson didn't even make Florida noticeably better necessarily. It's like, if he's that special, why did it not look like that? So that, I think, is what you come back to in year 2 with Anthony Richardson. Like, okay, he's an amazing athlete and he can do some special things, but what if the net of all that doesn't actually make the Colts much better?
Yeah, the thing I would add there is Richardson's playing style. He wasn't just hurt once last year. He was hurt multiple times in just a few games. And the positives that I had for Richardson coming out is what he opens up as a runner. That opens up the pass game. Shane Steichen, as head coach, is going to lean into that ability in the designed run game. However, as I've said many times on this show, QB health often comes down to playing style and whether or not you're going to take hits or not. And I don't care how big you are, lowering your shoulder and taking those hits, that does add up. So I think playing style-wise, to maximize what Richardson brings to the table, he's going to have to adjust that a little bit. That's a reason for concern.
Yeah, I mean, last year was like the worst-case scenario of that approach of quarterback play, right? You take a guy like that, you need to use him as part of the run game because it's part of what makes him so special, just like it was with Cam Newton and how it is with Josh Allen. The reason for concern with that is that style exposes those quarterbacks to more hits, and you know, if they're able to get through that, fine. But immediately, Richardson was hurt badly multiple times playing that style. Like, it couldn't go worse in terms of that approach. Like, if we're going to play that, a quarterback got hurt almost immediately and was taken out of the game. That's worst case scenario. That's an absolute catastrophe. If that's going to be him long term, we now need to change our offense. We need to dump the style, and we need to turn him into something that currently he is not. Now, he's closer to that than maybe people would expect him to be. And he actually kind of wants to play that style, but it still leaves stuff it leaves meat on the bone, right? If you ask Josh Allen to stop being Josh Allen, he's not what he is. Like, it fundamentally changes the ceiling, I think, of that player. So if you have to completely change expectations for what you can expect Anthony Richardson to do because he's going to get hurt playing that way, that changes the outlook for the Colts.
I'll add the cornerback room again. You know, last year they went in there with no experience whatsoever, had a bunch of big, long, athletic corners. They played okay.
I mean, just the defense. Like, what if all of the crazy athletes on defense don't actually amount to good football players?
But I just think the cornerback room in particular, they still weren't great last year. Juju Brents and Dallas Flowers, the guys that they have pegged as starters, Jalen Jones, Darrell Baker, still inexperienced without great play on the on film over the last couple of years. I think the defensive line should be pretty good, but you're right. I mean, the defense is, pretty good on paper. So your reasons for concerns for the Colts. Let's go to the Jacksonville Jaguars. Reasons for concern.
What if Trevor Lawrence actually isn't all that?
Oh man, you're not even going to go with the turnover at receiver, and maybe they don't have a true number one, and the verticality. You're going to go right to might not be.
No, I mean the biggest concern is what if Trevor Lawrence isn't that guy? Like, what if he's just solid? What if he's just pretty good, and he's not great?
I think he's at least that. I mean, I guess it is a reason for concern. Are we ever going to talk about Trevor Lawrence? Putting a full season together where he's played as well as Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow. He hasn't done that yet.
Right. A guy that was being talked about as a truly generational prospect, the best quarterback prospect since Andrew Luck in 2012 or Peyton Manning in 1998 or John Elway in the early 80s, hasn't looked anything like that. Last season, his PFF grade. Now, bear in mind, back end of the year, he's hurt, right? So the grade is going to be artificially suppressed because he was playing hurt. But his PFF grade was 79.7, which sandwiched him neatly between Geno Smith and Jake Browning, right? And the reason I think that's a fair thing to bring up is because his passing grade was like 4 points below Geno Smith. So even if you give him a bump and say, okay, he's playing hurt, let's bump him up 4 points. He's in the Geno world. He's not in the Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen world right now. And if that's who he is, the outlook for the Jags is worse than you would have expected it to be because they don't have a transcendent quarterback.
And it does feel like a year where you're going to need him to be extra special. We're trying to break in first-round receiver Brian Thomas. You've got Gabe Davis, Christian Kirk, all the receivers. We've talked a ton about the Jags receivers. Are they good enough to help elevate Trevor Lawrence? And then generally just with the Jags, there's just a lot of turnover. I think a lot of their offseason moves were kind of one for one. You lose a guy, you bring in a guy, lose a guy, bring in a guy. But is that actually going to be better? the turnover and the new players in the secondary. You lose a Darius Williams, you bring in Ronald Darby. You get a little bit older, maybe not as productive at that position. So some questions there. And then Trayvon Walker. Is he ever going to take that next step? I know you mitigate that a little bit with Eric Armstead coming in, but is Trayvon Walker ever going to come in, step up and be that viable option opposite Josh Allen?
Yeah, I mean, another team as well where secondary concerns, by that I mean secondary, tertiary, as opposed to the secondary. But as you mentioned, the wide receiver room, is that going to put it together? Is the offensive line going to be good enough for this offense to function? Is Travis Etienne going to be a dominant playmaker? Or is he just going to be more of a one-dimensional explosive guy that isn't necessarily the difference maker in the backfield? I mean, all these question marks. To me, the biggest one is the Trevor Lawrence thing. But outside of him, is the environment around him good enough for him to be that transcendent quarterback?
All right, let's go Tennessee Titans. Reasons for concern for the Titans.
I mean, it's Levis, right? What if second-round quarterback that threw 4 touchdowns in one game and then 4 touchdowns the rest of the way is just the guy that is okay?
You could say you get the low end of his volatility. I mean, he played at Jameis level of volatility last year, Will Levis. So we know, hey, I like that style, but it could go either way. It could go south. The other thing I would say is if they don't do it this year, on paper, I like a lot of what the Titans have done, but are they really set up for next year? Nuke Hopkins is in the last year of his deal. Does that end up, from just a team-building standpoint, does that bump Ridley to a number 1 receiver heading into 2025? And, they go all in with L'Jarius Sneed and Chidobe Awuzie in the secondary. Big investment, and it needs to show up this year, I think, to They're doing a lot to be better this year and give Will Levis a chance here. But again, if Levis isn't great, it could be ugly.
That's why I think he has to be the focus, because I actually like the moves that they've made. They might not be long-term moves, which I think is the point you're making. But it's not a reason for concern this year. It's did we mortgage the future just to find out about the guy this year? I think almost everything they've done should be a positive outcome this year. But none of that matters if Levis shows up and he's the same guy he was outside of that 4-touchdown game, and you're going to get some big-time throws, you're going to get some bad mistakes, and the net of that is just, it's just average. And now we assemble this group to find out if Levis is the guy, and he isn't the guy. And now we got to blow the whole thing up and start over. That I think is the concern for Tennessee.
And we're still working with last year one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL.
Yeah.
I know we've spun this into a positive. Bill Callahan's coming in, and they drafted J.C. Latham. But when you look at the starting 5 and how many players do we feel good about, we're probably at 2.5 out of 5 as far as feeling good about their performance next year without great improvement.
Bad is absolutely still within the range of outcomes of that offensive line. They are going from the worst offensive line in the NFL for 2 consecutive seasons. They're almost certainly going to be better. Even just adding Callahan to the coaching staff, you would think would make them better, would take them off the bottom spot of the NFL, even independent of adding, players in both free agency and the draft. But there's definitely a world where that group is still subpar and problematic. I mean, if J.C. Latham doesn't hit the ground running as their first-round rookie, if Nicholas Petit-Frere doesn't get better at the other tackle spot, now you've got bookend tackles that are both hemorrhaging pressure. If Peter Skoronski doesn't take a step forward next year, it's sort of maybe playing out of position at guard. Brunskill is okay, but not great. It's well within the range of outcomes. And now, to be fair, again, I think average is well within the range of outcomes of that offensive line as well.
But it's the concern show.
Yes, but it would be remiss to look at that and say, there's no way that this can still be a bad offensive line. It could absolutely still be a bad offensive line.
All right, let's go to the AFC West and the Denver Broncos. Reasons for concern.
What if Bo Nix was QB6 on their board and he was just the guy they're stuck with? And now they still don't have a quarterback, and Sean Payton's going to make himself look silly because he got rid of the guy that they just didn't like, mortgaged everything, and now their options are Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, and Jarrett Stidham.
Yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of turnover in Denver and uncertainty, right? I mean, not just Bo Nix, but you trade a Jerry Jeudy, and as much as, is this my favorite receiving core in the NFL. You get Tim Patrick coming back off of injury
your
over
guy,
the last
yeah.
couple of years, Marvin Mims,
that or
Troy
Buffalo.
Franklin. But these they have potential. But like again, we're talking sure things here. How many sure things does Denver even have on either side of the ball?
Well,
this could go either way this year.
Rewind to when they traded for Russell Wilson, right? And we've been saying this for at least a year at that point, because remember, initially it was like the Broncos are going to go after Aaron Rodgers. And if you put Aaron Rodgers on this Denver team, immediate Super Bowl, right? And then it was, okay, the Rodgers thing didn't happen twice, and now it's Russell Wilson. Well, Russell Wilson in this offense should still cook, right? And it obviously didn't. But the point being, now you fast forward a little bit and you look at what's remaining, and it's been chipped away at, and now you're like, they don't have the team around the quarterback that they used to have. Jerry Jeudy's gone, and even if he hadn't been gone, he hasn't been the player that they were expecting when they drafted him in the first round. Courtland Sutton hasn't really been the same since he got injured. He's definitely made some big plays in the last year, but isn't that number one superstar guy that they thought maybe he was becoming? And then Jerry Jeudy being the number two. Tim Patrick, your guy who you love. I mean, sure, but he is coming off that significant injury. Marvin Mims has only flashed, hasn't been, Troy Franklin was a fourth rounder who could be good, but, maybe he was a fourth rounder for a reason. So this group that a couple of years ago, you're like, this is a Super Bowl team in waiting if they can just get good quarterback play. Now you're looking at it and you're saying, well, their quarterback is Bo Nix, Zach Wilson, or Jarrett Stidham, and the situation might not be great either.
And I would say defensively, remember last year how bad they were. They were historically bad defensively for the first 6 or 7 weeks of the year, then turned it around. We're still looking at a defense on paper that's just, okay. Like when they turned it around last year, they, turnover luck and things went in their favor. They would need a lot of that again.
Well, you can, look in anywhere in the defense, you could have concerns outside of like Patrick Surtain individually, right?
Right.
But like up front, you're looking at that defensive line. They just traded for John Franklin Myers, who the Jets basically just decided wasn't good enough to keep on the roster, even though there's really no downside to keeping him at this point, in the season. It's not like you needed to free up resources or whatever. Like they had him. They decided he just wasn't worth it. He might be the best defensive lineman on the Broncos immediately.
All right, let's go to Kansas City Chiefs. Reasons for concern for the Chiefs. I'll start. I think left tackle.
Yeah.
So you've got Wanye Morris, last year's third rounder, and then Kingsley Suamataia, this year's late second rounder, essentially battling to replace Donovan Smith, who was solid. And when Donovan Smith went down, Wanye Morris, I think, struggled a little bit as a rookie. The offense struggled. And then replacing L'Jarius Sneed. The defense was a huge part of their Super Bowl run last year. Remember, last year was the worst offense of the Chiefs' Mahomes era. The defense carried them in several games, and their ability to play press man coverage and match up and just make life difficult for opposing offenses, L'Jarius Sneed was a huge part of that. So replacing Sneed in that secondary.
I think I would still focus in on the receiving core and say, okay, last year's receiving core was a problem. They were rescued in the postseason by Rashee Rice and his emergence. Now, Rashee Rice, since that point, appears to be on a mission to get himself run out of the league with street racing and then incidents involving photographers in nightclubs where charges are dropped and various things, right? So Rashee Rice, we don't know how much he's going to feature this year because of all those things. Travis Kelce just re-signed for a couple of years, but he's not getting any younger, right? At some point, you would imagine Travis Kelce is going to show some form.
He looked older and healthier for a big part of the season last year, yeah.
Yeah, like he's going to show some form of decline. He's 34 years old at this point. He's 10 months younger than Gronk, who's been out of the game for like half a decade twice, right? So at some point, they still rely on Travis Kelce being their number one receiver. If he starts to show any signs of decline, that's a bigger blow for them than it would be for other teams. And then the fixes, the actual solutions at wide receiver have been two reasonably similar style players in Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy, guys that are smaller speedsters that profile as vertical specialists who can theoretically do an awful lot more, but they've almost pivoted towards a specific type of receiver whose role in today's NFL is more up in the air than it's been in previous years because of the push to take away explosive plays and vertical threat and all those kinds of things. So if they've identified, like, what if Marquise Brown and Xavier Worthy don't immediately transform this offense back into the Tyreek Hill era Chiefs, and now you just got like a whole bunch of smaller vertical threats, Rashee Rice, who could like be suspended for a giant period of time, and an aging Travis Kelce who might slow down. Like, that starts to look like last year's Chiefs. You were like, okay, I mean, sure, they won a Super Bowl.
Before they changed everything in the playoffs and went on a run, right?
Right, or even if...
There were plenty of concerns for the Chiefs during the regular season. They rectified those on a 4-game run where they, didn't turn the ball over, played really clean, but there were concerns for the Chiefs last year.
And even if, like, I mean, Marquez Valdez-Scantling made a massive clutch play for them that probably is the difference between them winning a championship or not, right? That receiving core was a problem. They just, on a key play, showed up big, right? If that doesn't happen, they don't win a championship again. Like, the Chiefs, the reason for pessimism or concern for the Chiefs, like, the only thing that can take them out of being like contenders is a Mahomes injury, right? Which is true for any team with an elite quarterback. But outside of that, any reason for pessimism or concern or negativity, you're not saying like, oh, this is a 6-win team here. You're saying this could be the reason they don't win a critical game against, Cincinnati, Buffalo, Houston, whoever in the postseason.
I mean, just like the optimism thing, it's relative to expectations here.
Right. Like, their baseline is still winning the division, winning double-digit games, being one of the favorites in the playoffs every single.
What are the things that keep them from the three-peat?
Right. But a thing that could stop them winning that third championship in a row is this receiver core.
Let's go Las Vegas Raiders and their reasons for concern. Has to start at quarterback, right? Just question marks with in a division where you're trying to beat the Chiefs and Mahomes and the Chargers and Justin Herbert, Aiden O'Connell in year 2, and then Gardner Minshew.
Yeah, their quarterback is built more on vibes than production, right? Like, they have maybe the finest vibes QB room in football in Aiden O'Connell and Gardner Minshew. Aiden O'Connell, you see him change his number? Gave up number 4. That's Derek Carr's number. Felt disrespectful to have that number. Which, by the way, the implication of that is that was forced upon him by Josh McDaniels. Like, if he felt it was disrespectful, why he surely didn't pick the number himself then? Somebody assigned it to him. And if they assigned it to him, they either didn't know that was Derek Carr's number, or they pointedly said, yeah, Derek, see ya.
Maybe he chose it and he just wants to be unblocked on Twitter by Darren Carr.
That's also possible. Anyway, their quarterback room is built more on vibes than anything else. The other thing that would be concerning is, there's a reason that teams don't necessarily fall over themselves anymore to hand the head coaching job, to the interim head coach that had a bump of a few games, because they haven't got a great track record of working out after that. So whilst everyone kind of agrees that it was the correct thing to give Antonio Pierce the job after the job that they did taking over, what if that was just the product of liberating themselves, the shackles coming off from the disastrous Josh McDaniels era 2.0? And actually, it had very little to do with Antonio Pierce. It was simply they no longer had the guy dragging them down at the helm anymore.
And we've talked about defensive regression on the show a little bit. The defense played pretty well down the stretch.
What if a defense built around Robert Spillane isn't the way to go? In fact, in the future,
they got some. Last year it looked like Max Crosby and friends, and he got a lot more help than I think we anticipated last year. But it's another one of those. Christian Wilkins comes in, but like on paper, still not a great defense if they're banking on the way they played down the stretch.
It felt like they overachieved relative to the talent level last year, and the talent level has improved with guys like Christian Wilkins, but it still isn't a great talent level on paper. I mean, at every level, you can identify at least one guy that seems below average.
All right, wrapping up the AFC West, reasons for concern for the Los Angeles Chargers. Has to be the receiver room still.
Yeah.
Right? They went into the draft, opted into not having Mike Williams or Keenan Allen, and they did draft Ladd McConkey. They bring in DJ Chark. As much as I love Ladd McConkey, it feels like we're stitching it together relative to other receiving cores around the league. And then I think maybe Greg, I don't know if it's a reason for concern, but it's, keep an eye on the Greg Roman, Justin Herbert combination. And Roman, you want Herbert passing the ball more than previous Roman quarterbacks have. Do they have a robust enough passing offense, passing system to maximize Herbert's ability?
Yeah, like what if everyone's sort of imagining this world where they want to run the ball a lot more. They want to, they have a much more old school approach to offensive football. What if that's just taking the ball out of the hands of your best player? Like Justin Herbert, okay, we've been waiting the last couple of years. We've been like, where's the last 5% of Justin Herbert to get this truly special player? But he's still by far their best offensive player. Like, what if they're planning on just like every handoff to Gus Edwards or J.K. Dobbins or Vidal, the rookie, like those are just plays where Justin Herbert's not throwing the ball and potentially making something special happen, even with a concerning looking receiver core. Like if this approach is sort of self-sabotaging and just hamstringing their best player, that's not good.
Defensively, I mean, still questions. I mean, it's a whole new defense. Is it defensive adjustment? Jesse Minter comes in from Michigan, adjusting to the new personnel. Will they hit the ground running with a new scheme? I mean, I feel like that one could go either way. They got Christian Fulton, Asante Samuel as the 1-2 punch at corner. You have Joey Bosa, Khalil Mack rushing the passer. Look, Mack rejuvenated at one point. Like he started slow, kind of got back on track, but he had showed signs of slowing down at points. And is he just a guy that dominates bad right tackles at this point in his career? So maybe some questions for those guys purely rushing the passer in Joey Bosa's case, staying healthy. So those are the reasons for concern. My biggest one, though, I think is the Herbert-Roman combination in the wide receiver room and what their plans are offensively.
That feels a little bit like the Steelers dynamic we talked about earlier, where there's definitely a world where Greg Roman and Justin Herbert is not ideal chemistry for an offense. And actually, we've been casting around trying to find whatever the right offense is for Justin Herbert to play his best football, but there's definitely a chance that this ends up being the exact opposite of that, and this ends up being one of the worst possible offenses for him.
All right, we're on to the NFC and the NFC East, starting with the Dallas Cowboys. Reasons for concern for the Cowboys, and I would say the reason for concern is just playoff games.
Good, facing a good team, ever.
Facing good teams. The 49ers, the Eagles, not in Dallas, those are concerns.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest concern is they have had a fairly stable, predictable level for the last few years. It's been 12 wins and then losing to the best teams when the chips are down, when the most critical situations are in the postseason. And they're one of those teams this offseason where you look at them and you're like, did they get better? Because there's other teams that did.
Yeah, the Cowboys, I thought going into the 2022 season, maybe, that was when they traded Amari Cooper. They may have left. They kind of left a hole at receiver relative to where they were previously. They left a couple holes on the roster. Last year, I thought they did a great job filling those holes late when it was Brandon Cooks at receiver and it was Stephon Gilmore at corner. The Cowboys felt more prepared, just better, more well-rounded, better depth. And honestly, I think the on-field product for the Cowboys last year was the best we've seen of the Dak Prescott era, of the Mike McCarthy era. They just hit that same wall in the playoffs where they didn't play well against the Packers. Now, relative to last year, Dallas rolls into the season with more question marks than they had last year. Wide receiver 3 is a bigger question mark. Tyler Guyton moving from right tackle to left tackle as a project first rounder is a question mark. Center, if it's Cooper Beebe, making the move from guard to center as a rookie. So 2 rookies starting on the offensive line. They have more question marks on this roster than they had last year. Yeah,
the offensive line might not be particularly good. Their running back room is now headed by Zeke Elliott years down the line after he was last playing, high-level productive football. I think overall you look at this team and you say they probably look worse on paper heading into this year than they did a year ago. And last year's version wasn't good enough to get it done. So I think ultimately that's the big concern for Dallas is that they didn't get better. They came out of last season like, does Jerry Jones fire everybody and reboot, right? And he's like, nope, we're going to stay the course. We're going to give it all one more go. Kept talking about being all in a way that sounded like he doesn't even know the meaning of that sentence. But you look at the outcome of that. We're in late May now. We're almost, towards the start of the season. And the outcome does not look obviously better than it was a year ago, which wasn't good enough. So The reason for concern for Dallas is ultimately they don't appear to have gotten any better from a position that wasn't good enough to get them where they wanted to go.
Tony Pollard ran the ball pretty well down the stretch. They're replacing him with Zeke Elliott.
Yeah, like Tony Pollard didn't necessarily become what they wanted him to be when he got given like that number one job. He'd outperformed Zeke for years, finally got given the kind of number one undisputed gig, and maybe wasn't the player that they expected, but he's still likely better than Zeke in the same position. So that got worse. Like, there's just too many spots where they appear to be worse than they were last season.
All right, let's go to the New York Giants. Reasons for concern for the Giants.
By the way, one last part. Dak Prescott had arguably an MVP season last year. That's probably the best version of Dak Prescott you're going to get. So the chances are he's going to be worse this year.
Yeah, and just to remind, I mean, I thought Dak, if you just looked at the stats, if you just looked at the results, it was his best season. Most of his production came against the worst teams in the league,
sure.
Right? And every time you wanted to, have them like let's go beat the Bills and let's beat Philadelphia in Philly when they were still pretty good. Let's beat the Niners. Dak struggled, and the offense struggled, and the whole team struggled. So it was a weird year, but overall, snap for snap, the best season of Dak Prescott's career.
Right.
All right, let's go to the New York Giants here. Concerns.
Well, Daniel Jones is still their starting quarterback. That feels problematic.
Yeah, we don't know if the offensive line is necessarily that much better. They have invested in it. Daniel Jones under center. Did he peak 2 years ago when they leaned into his running ability? Top 20 rusher of all time for quarterbacks in 2022. But is it still enough? Do they do enough to show that Daniel Jones can do something, can move the ball, especially through the air, relative to the other QBs in the league?
Yeah, the offensive line, they threw a lot at it. It might still be bad, kind of maybe even worse than Tennessee's, but bad is still absolutely within the range of outcomes for this offensive line as well. Andrew Thomas is really good. Jermaine Illuminor, I think, is at his best playing tackle. I don't know if they're going to start him at tackle or if they're going to have him kicked into guard where he's not as good. John Michael Schmitz, we loved coming out, looked rough as a rookie. If he's not significantly better year two, they've at least the competition there is Austin Schlottman, who's, let's say, average at best. John Runyon, again, average at best, and they're paying him reasonable money. And then Evan Neal, who's been a disaster in the NFL so far, is still, I think, expected to start at right tackle. So that could still be an offensive line that features one good player and four problems.
I would also say the secondary, with Wink Martindale leaving, and I thought the way Wink embraces variance and zero blitzing and send in the house, and it kind of works in your favor if you don't have a ton of talent. I don't think the Giants, outside of a few players, of course, had a ton of talent on this defense the last couple of years. Did they overachieve? And now are they going to rely on a more traditional, hey, just get out there and play? And if that's the case, Nick McLeod and Trey Hawkins III and Andrew Phillips as a rookie competing for that cornerback spot opposite Deonte Banks. I think there's some questions in the secondary there. And honestly, I've never been the biggest Brian Burns fan for what they paid there. I think he's a good pass rusher, not great, average to below average run defender. So I just don't know if the talent's there on the defensive side of the ball.
Well, also stylistically, like remember, one of the Wink Martindale's defense is one of the most schematically unique systems in the NFL in terms of it's way out there on its own. He wants a ton of man coverage. He wants a ton of blitzing. He wants a ton of zero. It's all, you need a very specific group of players that can play that type of defense, right? Now they're pivoting away to a much more conventional middle-of-the-road NFL system, meaning everyone that was just assembled for that previous defense is not an ideal fit for the one you're currently running. So a guy like Deonte Banks, for example, right? First-round cornerback, his primary skill set was sticky man coverage, right? Well, now he's going to have to do a bunch of different things within this defense. Isaiah Simmons, similar player, like a guy that was brought in because he's a talented athlete who can match up in man coverage in specific scenarios. They have a bunch of guys that were collected for Wink Martindale's defense who now have to play a very stylistically different system, which may be easier in some situations, but how that all pans out is a risk.
All right, let's go to the Philadelphia Eagles. Reasons for concern for the Eagles.
They collapsed down the stretch and didn't get rid of the coach that presided over the collapse.
Morale.
What if
in a collapse?
I mean, what if last year was an actual rot that set in and they didn't just changing the coordinators didn't fix it. Like, what
Yeah.
if that was an indication that Nick Sirianni had run into a wall or got in over his head somewhere along, or there's something actually at work at the foundations of this team, and that didn't get fixed by bringing in, Vic Fangio and Kellen Moore.
As much as we have complimented their ability to draft 2 top corners with their first 2 draft picks, they needed to do that probably because we saw the regression from James Bradbury last year, Darius Slay getting a little bit older, and then just the depth getting chipped away at. Jason Kelsey's retiring, so you're moving Cam Jurgens to center. So is it really 2 new starters on the offensive line? Not really, but there's turnover on the offensive line, which has been so consistent. I mean, the Eagles have had one of the best offensive lines since like 2015 for us, with maybe 1 bad year in there. So maybe chipping away at some of that depth. Devontae Parker just retired.
Which leaves them really thin at receiver once you get – the top 2 are fantastic. A.J. Brown, one of the top receivers in the NFL. Devontae Smith, probably the best number 2 receiver in the NFL. Those 2 are great. And obviously Dallas Goedert at tight end is really good as well. But in terms of wide receiver, like the next 2 guys on the depth chart are probably the rookies, Johnny Wilson and Aeneas Smith. Paris Campbell is the only other guy there that's like this is –
They did make a power move last week.
They signed
Ross.
John Ross.
They did sign John Ross.
Saw that.
So I know it's the reasons for concern
Signed him
show.
out of
I know
retirement.
we're supposed to be pessimistic, but this could be the year for John Ross.
They signed him out of retirement.
Yeah.
He unretired to play with the Eagles. Yeah.
You think he still runs 4.2?
You think he's just mad that somebody broke his record and he wants, it's not like he can get it back. He can't go run the combine again, but
Why not? Go to Indy, set it up.
yeah.
Go run 4.2. Go
I
get
saw
the record.
I think they simulcast at one point John Ross's 4.22 versus Xavier Worthy's 4.21, and John Ross was running Worthy down fast by the end of that, which kind of suggests that, and they simulcast it versus somebody else, and it's not like Worthy's versus somebody else, and he didn't blow them away out of the blocks, right? Which rather suggests those 2 pieces of information together rather suggests that John Ross ran a 4.22 with a bad start.
Oh, yeah. I think a big part of Worthy running 4.21 is he is an elite track athlete. Technique-wise, obviously you have to be fast to run 4.21, but I don't think there's a false step anywhere in Worthy's technique, whereas most other guys, it's you'll have a decent, I think Ross might just be a better pure speed guy, or was at that point. Worthy just feels like technique, sound, and he's maximizing all of that. So there we go. Reasons for concern for the Eagles. They're getting older, chipping away at the depth there.
And even just
last year's collapse.
And the turnover across the board, right? They had this incredible roster, and they've done a really good job in terms of trying to future-proof it. But the risk is always, when you try and do that, you might just get it wrong sometimes, right? The Bengals are dealing with this, right? Dax Hill was a future-proofing type of pick. DJ Turner, a future-proofing type of pick. You can identify these guys and go, all right, we bring him in, he sits for a year, the next year he steps in, and that the learning from the sideline and the development, the coaching we can do maximizes the chances that that guy steps in and we seamlessly transition from veteran to younger player. Boom, we don't miss a beat, right? But if you get the wrong guy, you can't fix that. All you did is you don't know until a year later when he has to come into the lineup. So the Eagles have been doing this for a while, and again, done a good job of it, but Nakobe Dean hasn't become that player yet, right? He's still relied on maybe to be that guy, or maybe that becomes Jeremiah Trotter this year, but you look at the linebacker group and you're like, nobody there is a proven commodity yet. James Bradbury, Darius Slay, they're only getting older. Quinyon Mitchell may have to come in and be good right away. If he isn't, problem.
Brought Devin White in, there's going to be some bad plays.
Right. And then the defensive line, they are transitioning. They're moving away from these old guys. Fletcher Cox retired along with Jason Kelsey. Brandon Graham is somehow still there and kicking. But, you now need – Jalen Carter was fantastic for the first half of the season. Second half, not so much. Jordan Davis. Again, we've flashed great plays. We haven't seen consistently high-level play from Jordan Davis yet. He can't replace what you had in Fletcher Cox yet. Milton Williams has been okay. Nolan Smith hasn't done it yet. You can see what they've done, but they're now relying on those guys to actually play at the same level as the players they've replaced. And to date, you wouldn't say they've done that.
You really are good at this show. You have a lot to say.
Inbuilt
A
negativity.
lot to say.
Easy.
In the Reasons for Concern show. Let's wrap up the NFC East with the Washington Commanders. Reasons for concern for Washington.
My biggest one would be if Cliff Kingsbury's offense has not evolved
Interesting.
since the last time we saw it.
You've said this a lot, but listen, they had a good offense, though. They had bouts with a good offense.
Not at the end.
Yeah, but was that because they were more injured? They had some issues.
Or because the system stopped evolving?
I mean, that's what you think.
That's my question. I mean, you look at so it's not that he can't. This is the thing with Kingsbury is that very early his system made a bunch of different changes. Right? They dumped
the purest air raid. I almost said run and shoot. The purest air raid iteration that we've seen at the NFL level.
Right. And that lasted like a couple of weeks. And they were like, I can't run 10 personnel every play. I'm going to have to go pivot. I got to get rid of that, right? I got to go to 11 personnel some more. And anyway, he made a bunch of changes right away, right? He showed that he understands I'm not going to do something that just isn't going to work over and over again. I need to make some changes where it's obvious that. But then he seemed to have like gone, okay, now I've got it. Now I've got the system dialed in. I understand. But then I think the thing about that scheme is it still fundamentally believes that there is more value to everyone lining up in the same place and just running quickly than there is taking advantage of the various different schematic ways you can stress a defense without doing anything yourself, right? So, for example, I think the other end of the scale is Mike McDaniel's offense in Miami, right? Where they're running a lot of the same things everybody else, but they're like, you know what will really stress a defense? This short motion stuff, right? And we can just do exactly the same play, but you put this in it, and suddenly it becomes an absolute 24-karat nightmare for a defense to have to deal with, because now you got to communicate on the fly in half a second before the snap and get things changed. Kingsbury appears to be at the other end of the scale where he says, if we just line up quickly, everyone knows where they are, left wide receiver, slot, right wide receiver, everyone knows where they're going to be. We line up and we out-execute the defense. I think you can do that in college, right? One of the reasons I hate college football is because almost all the big plays are just defensive screw-ups, right? And doing things like that, just executing quickly, causes defensive screw-ups in college. It doesn't in the NFL. NFL defenses are too smart. They're too good. They're too able to think on their feet and react. You lining up the same guy in the same spot every single play and just doing it quickly doesn't cut it, right? It was, and we've seen a couple of systems in today's NFL or in the NFL in the last 15 years have that kind of idea, and ultimately they all ran into a wall because once you figure out what they're doing, now you need to stress the defense with something else. And he didn't. He stopped. So, in my opinion, if he comes back with that same offense that hasn't changed, it's going to be a problem.
So you got Kingsbury, his evolution as a play caller, designer. I would say the offensive line that we kept talking about in the draft. Are they going to get a left tackle? They drafted Brandon Coleman from TCU.
Yep.
He's competing with more of a swing tackle and Cornelius Lucas at left tackle. Right tackle's Andrew Wiley. I mean, that looks like one of the worst tackle situations in the NFL.
Worst lines. I mean, again, another line where bad is absolutely within the range of outcomes.
Yeah, I mean, averages too, but it's probably on the bottom end of offensive lines. And I would say the defense. Remember a couple of years ago when Chase Young was out there and healthy and Montez Sweat was out there. They were loaded on the defensive line. Now they're edge rushers. Cleveland Ferrell, Dante Fowler, Dorrance Armstrong. You've got Armstrong and Fowler coming over. Familiarity with Dan Quinn coming from Dallas. But they were backups over there, right? They were rotational players over there. So you're in Cleveland Ferrell's a rotational player. So those guys rushing the passer. Quinn's defense the last couple of years was really dependent on that front four, creating a ton of pressure. They don't really have those pieces right now, and similar questions in the secondary. So the defensive personnel, they're going to need a lot of young players to step up there. So I think they're a team in transition where there's a lot of reasons for optimism for Washington, but of course it's a rebuilding effort. So there's a lot of question marks still.
And then what if the red flags on Jaden Daniels become a problem in the NFL? Like his inability to protect himself, his sort of suicidal approach to running around with the football, and his catastrophically bad pressure to sack rate for his college career. those are things that put him in company with a lot of bad quarterbacks and Joe Burrow. What if he's in the group of the bad quarterbacks, and that paired with an offensive line where bad is within the range of outcomes, you end up with this really ugly struggle as a rookie season for Jaden Daniels, where it looks like Bryce Young last year, right? Where there's a lot of quick pressure, and when there isn't quick pressure, he's finding ways to manufacture pressure, creating sacks, creating big mistakes. There's definitely a world where that doesn't go well year one.
All right, let's go to the NFC North and reasons for concern for the Chicago Bears. I think for me, I'm going to start on the defensive side of the ball. And is there too much false hope with the defense playing better the second half of the year last year? It seemed to coincide with Montez Sweat, but as we've mentioned multiple times on this show, as soon as you start feeling good about the defense, those things can regress pretty easily. And I think talent-wise, the Bears aren't bad. Look, I thought talent-wise last year coming into the season, they had far more question marks than they have now, especially the way Jalen Johnson played at corner last year. But even that, last year was by far Jalen Johnson's best season at a volatile position. Defense generally a little bit more volatile, so I think there's some regression potential there. And then there's just the overall, you've got rookie quarterback Caleb Williams. What if some of the negatives, the ball security, the trying to do too much, the hero ball stuff, if that shows up just more often at the NFL level, all of that optimism for Caleb Williams, might be tempered a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, the comps he gets to Patrick Mahomes, they're fair in terms of he's capable of doing some of those crazy things that only Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, those guys are capable of doing. But last year was an interesting year for him because it was the first year where he actually started to get punished for some of those plays, right? And games like the Notre Dame game, 4 turnover-worthy plays, no big-time throws. Like, he finally started to get punished for some of those plays. And the question mark with Mahomes, the scouting report for almost everybody read the same. It was just a case of how you feel about that is, can he play within structure more often than this? What he's doing is great, but that's not the way the NFL works. He's going to need to play within structure. And the answer was obviously, well, yes, absolutely, he can. But the question remains legit for a guy like Caleb Williams. Can he play more within structure? And again, I think the answer is yes, but if he doesn't, you might end up getting a lot more games in the NFL that look like the Notre Dame game where 4 big mistakes, 3 of which result in interceptions.
You add to that the offensive line, I would say, too. There's this back and forth between how much did Justin Fields make them look worse in pass protection, but they also had a scheme that was trying to get him out on the edge and sort of protecting the O-line a little bit. I don't think you're going to get as much of that with Caleb Williams. Can this line hold up in pass pro? Are they good enough from a run blocking standpoint? It looks like an okay offensive line, but to use your phrase, the range of outcomes here could go either way for what looks like a mid-tier type of offensive line for the Bears.
Yep.
So those are your reasons for concern. How about the Detroit Lions' reasons for concern? I mean, I like the moves they've made on the defensive line, but that's because it's from a process standpoint. I like taking a shot on Marcus Davenport. I still don't know, do we have a good enough pass rusher opposite Aiden Hutchinson? It's a mishmash of Marcus Davenport, Josh Paschal, James Houston, who was injured for most of last season. I still think that's a reason for concern that none of those guys really emerged, because I thought it was way too one-dimensional with Aiden Hutchinson. DJ Reader certainly helps on the interior, but I think that's a concern for the Lions, who have a very deep roster, obviously, and we're looking for these reasons for concern here.
Yeah, I mean, man, the Lions are really good. I don't have many reasons for concern at all. My biggest one would probably be, or the one that could make the biggest impact would be, what if you just get a bad run of variance for Jared Goff?
Yeah, I was thinking that one too. I mean, last year was his best overall season, and so when you're younger, you're like, oh, the guy got better, he's better.
Yeah.
And then the analyst in you is like, oh, he just had his best season. We have this lower baseline of play from this guy. How is he going to can he actually keep that up?
And they just gave him, a big top-of-the-market quarterback money contract. It would be sort of just perfect poetry, perfect fate, where he responds to that by a bad season relative to his standards. And remember, last year was strange where, for 3/4 of the season, he was playing at a genuine all-pro level. Like, he was as good as pretty much any quarterback in the NFL. But the wheels threatened to completely fall off for like a month in the middle of the season.
Yeah, week 11 to 14, I'm looking at it right now. Grades of 47, 52, then a 77, then a 44. He had that 3 out of 4 games that were rough.
Right, 3 out of 4 games straight for like a month were just horrendous. And it's not like they came against amazing defenses necessarily. They were the division games. There were 2 games against the Bears and a Packers game. And then previously, a few weeks before that, there was one bad game against Baltimore, Baltimore, that's a really good defense. That's one that makes sense. But the bad version of Goff last year was still horrendous, right? And he's a quarterback that has been his MO a little bit in his NFL career. The good version of Jared Goff looks great and looks like he does, belong as a number 1 overall selection. The bad version of Jared Goff in the NFL tends to be horrendous. And you still saw that guy last year, even in the best season of his career. Like, what if instead of 4 of those games next year, you get 8?
So then the other question is, do they have enough to go with Amon-Ra St. Brown, Sam Laporta? Obviously, they've got a good deep receiving core with a couple stars in St. Brown and Laporta. I would say receiver opposite St. Brown, or on the outside, Jameson Williams, Khalif Raymond, Donovan Peoples-Jones. Do they have enough of a high-volume Josh Reynolds replacement?
It's not the optimism show, but Dan Campbell was saying so far, if he had to identify a most improved player,
I know,
it would be Jameson Williams. And your favorite Twitter account, the Coach Speak analysis thing.
Yeah.
Apparently Dan Campbell has a 90% accuracy rate when it comes to assessing the roster. So Dan Campbell saying Jameson Williams is the most improved player.
To the moon. Rocket ship emoji.
Write it down. Note it down.
See, that's how good the Lions are. In the Reasons for Concern show, we could still spin it positively for Detroit. Let's go to the Green Bay Packers. Reasons for concern. I mean, to me, it has to start with, Jordan Love was great after Thanksgiving. And so that's a sample size issue. Looked completely different than he did earlier in the year. The analyst in you says, did he really just turn a corner, or does the whole body of work matter? And the whole body of work, there were some concerns early in the year with Jordan Love. So is he really that guy? League's going to adjust. Consistency is the thing, not just, an 8 to 10 game run. Can he be that consistent for a full season here?
I think you can extend that out to basically the whole team. I mean, it's the youngest team in the NFL again. And generally speaking, the youngest team in the NFL is not one of the best teams in the NFL, because a collection of young players without a kind of bedrock of older, experienced veterans find it difficult to sustain that kind of high-level play. And the Packers went on an amazing run, and they look great towards or down the stretch last year. And you tend to assume that, well, if they were the youngest team last year and playing well at the end of the year, those guys will all get better, the same rate, they'll all get better collectively this offseason. They'll be even better next year. But they might not. Like, what if the youngest team in the NFL actually starts to behave more like the youngest team in the NFL usually behaves, which is wildly inconsistent, capable of beating teams, capable of losing to any given team, and you just get an actual overall regression from this group?
I'll add the middle of the defense, linebacker, one of the weaknesses on this team. They attacked it in the draft with a couple draft picks, Edgerrin Cooper, who I liked. But again, we still have questions at linebacker, consistency there, questions at defensive tackle. Remember, the Packers' defense last year was not only blowing leads late. They were blaming the system for that, but they were blowing a lot of leads late. And there was games where they were just undisciplined from a gap discipline standpoint up front. Defensive tackle, you've seen flashes from Devontae Wyatt, but maybe not consistency. TJ Slayton, similar. So maybe some questions on the defensive interior.
Did you see this report on Christian Watson?
Yeah, about his hamstrings.
Yeah. So this tweet from somebody called Easton Butler. Christian Watson went down to UW-Madison this offseason, which apparently is a place where the NFL has given them $4 million to research treatment and prevention of hamstring injuries. And Christian Watson is one of these guys that's dealt with hamstring injuries in the NFL. So he went down along with Eric Stokes to find out the cause of their hamstring issues. With Watson finding out there was a difference in his muscle mass in his legs, with his right leg being 20% less in muscle mass than his left. Since he found out, he's dropped the difference to 8 to 10% and has seen more explosive during practices. Watson is trying to drop the difference to only 6%. I don't know what the baseline for that is, but 20% difference seems wild.
I mean, you just don't know what the baseline is, though.
But
so
a fifth, like that seems visibly noticeable, right? 20% difference in your left leg versus your right?
No, I mean,
that's a fifth.
I'm assuming
That's
because they're
huge.
studying it, they know what the baseline is and they know where it should be. But
I mean,
don't know what the
it says if
baseline
he's
is.
trying to drop the difference to 6%, I'm assuming the difference is in the baseline difference is in single digits somewhere.
Yeah.
Like the fact that they've highlighted this, 20% just seems like a crazy figure.
Well, that's why you're supposed to train. And shout out to my old trainer, Mike Boyle, who's at the forefront of a lot of just general training. But he trained Mike Mamula for the famous Combine. He trained Steve Palazzolo. He trained Rich Hill, who was the oldest non-Tom Brady professional player last year. But we would always do single leg training so that you don't have those imbalances, right? And so that's what he needs to – you got to lose the imbalances. That's where injuries come from.
Surely as a pitcher, your entire body must have been imbalanced.
Yeah, it was a weird one because you know how analytical I am with stuff. When I first met Mike Boyle, I sent him an email with about 30 questions about training. And it was like, well, all I do as a pitcher is the same thing over and over again, right? I should be in balance, right? Because all I do is drive off my right leg and I throw with my right eye. Everything's the same thing over and over again. And he was like, just come train with me. I'm not answering all these questions. So just come with me. And he was still preaching balance and everything, not like, oh, we're going to train you for your right side. Because your right side's doing different things than your left side, but you still need to be in balance for
But like even if
injury
if I wanted to, I couldn't replicate. Like I can't throw with my left hand at all. It looks like, you know, those sort of like ridiculous videos where you see people that can't throw things. It's like I literally can't replicate the motion with my left side.
Yeah, but you could have strength that's similar in your left arm. You just don't have the
but you
ability
see,
to
like,
replicate a motion.
You see guys like Mahomes, you know, they're sort of doing these weird things where it's very closely replicating sort of throwing motions and, you know, those types of torques and whatever. Like I literally can't replicate those motions with the left side of my body.
Yeah, most people
just won't do it.
Most people can't.
Yeah.
All right.
So another reason for concern, you know, what if his imbalanced legs just don't let him function?
I mean, that's optimism. If they've potentially solved the problem, that's
because it's like the Troy Williamson thing, right? He got LASIK, he can catch now. No, what if his imbalanced legs, the fact that he's dragging around 20% more on one side, just means he's going to be running in circles for his entire NFL career?
Big concern.
Yeah.
Packers.
I got a tweet reply that said maybe his. Which leg was
we were flying and we're pushing the heart out here.
This is good stuff. Which was the bigger leg? Whichever the smaller leg was. They were like, maybe that leg was 20% fatter, so it looked the same.
So it's just muscle mass, not mass.
So one of them's got 20% more muscle than the other, and the other one's got 20% more fat, and they look the same, but this one's like 6 times heavier.
But you're more likely to pull the bigger muscle.
Yes, and it's heavier. That throws the whole thing out of whack. No wonder he can't catch a ball.
What weighs more, a pound of muscle or a pound of fat?
They weigh the same.
Good work. Minnesota Vikings, reasons for concern for the Vikings.
They no longer have a good quarterback.
What?
They got rid of Kirk Cousins.
Potentially.
Now they brought in J.J. McCarthy, who threw like 7 passes last year.
That's a reason for concern.
Yeah. What if now you need him to throw more than that? He can't do it. Okay, that's obviously facetious. But what if the joke, we maybe fell into a trap with Baker Mayfield. We'd kind of identified some, you know, vaguely concerning parts of his tape. But you're like, under pressure, his numbers are great, right? But what if when you scale up the amount he's under pressure, it changes the dynamic of how he actually performs under pressure because the volume is relevant, right? And when you actually increase the amount of plays where Baker Mayfield feels pressure, suddenly he kind of fell apart and became a different player. What if it's not that J.J. McCarthy can't play well, if, you know, his play, he did a lot relative to expectations, but what if simply asking him to do a lot more changes that? And when he needs to play the same level of hero ball as Caleb Williams or, you know, Jaden Daniels or even Drake May, he's no longer as efficient and as metronomic as he was when he could take the whole second half off against Penn State.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's general concerns about any rookie quarterback, so you throw that out there with JJ, who was QB5 off the board, QB5 off the board in the draft. Offensive line, maybe in the interior, Blake Brandel and Garrett Bradbury and Ed Ingram. Just okay play from that trio historically. So I think there's concerns there. And then defensively, I think they have more talent.
Still a work in progress.
But yeah, there's still work to do.
I mean, you look, they still might not have a viable cornerback, which for a start is a fairly significant concern.
Mekhi Blackman. I think they got Mekhi Blackman. He's fine.
I mean, we don't know where he's going to be playing yet, but sure, maybe. And like last year, he was their best corner last year.
He's probably going to play outside corner.
He was their best.
I think our depth chart's off. He should be starting opposite Shaquille Griffin.
He was their best corner last year, and they never really trusted him to show that. So, I mean, sure, he might be good. I loved him coming out, but, I mean, he might not start for them yet. Like, we don't know.
So I'd say all of those. And again, like I said, for some other teams, defensive interior, the group of Jonathan Bullard, Harrison Phillips, Jerry Tillery, the other Jonah Williams. Is that enough on the defensive interior, against the run? So I think there's some question marks there for Minnesota. Good.
Uh-huh.
We're on to the AFC South. Reasons for concern for the Atlanta Falcons.
Kirk Cousins is old and coming off an Achilles. What if he's not that good anymore?
Got a first-time play caller in Zach Robinson.
First-time play caller.
Big concern.
Uh-huh.
Don't know what he's going to do. What if he crumbles under the pressure?
Yeah.
No, you don't know.
And what if he's just a product of the McVay system? What if he's the latest guy who had a cup of coffee with Sean McVay?
Product of the PFF system. He just can't
cut it in his own.
Can't do it.
Yeah.
You don't know. What else for Atlanta? Here's a concern for Atlanta.
Retread head coach. What if he can't handle it outside of McVay?
Atlanta's offensive line has graded well for us over the last couple of years, and I think it's a big part of it is the run-heavy system and the Arthur Smith system probably helping them as a line. When there's a little bit more pressure on Caleb McGarry at right tackle in particular, how are they going to handle that in more of a pass-first type of system?
Well, I guess that is relevant. The whole kind of offense overall. What if Arthur Smith wasn't actually as big of a problem as people thought he was, right? What if actually Kyle Pitts just isn't the special superstar people thought he was at tight end? Drake London is fine, but he's limited. He's, not necessarily a number one superstar. Darnell Mooney is the guy that didn't work out with Chicago, not the guy that is going to rediscover the optimism within this offense. And Bijan Robinson is great, but he's a running back, so he can't carry it by himself. And now you've got Kirk Cousins behind an offensive line that's better in run blocking than pass blocking, and a group of receiving talent that we were excited by but might actually just be overrated. And suddenly the good side of the ball, the side that we're comfortable with and that we're optimistic about, is actually only average, and the defense is still weak because you passed up on the opportunity to bring in an impact defensive player at number 8 overall, instead drafted your backup quarterback.
And that's the concern on the defensive side of the ball is at edge, where it's Lorenzo Carter and Arnold Ebiketie as starters. Yes, you brought in Braylon Trice. You have year 2 of Zach Harrison. There's some depth there at edge, but no real impact playmaker. I liked Ebiketie coming out. He hasn't been that guy so far. Rushing the passer was a 23-year-old rookie, so a little bit older. So I think just pure pass rush for the Falcons is probably a reason for concern this year.
And Clark Phillips at 5'9" is one of your 2 top corners.
Yeah, CB2 is a question mark opposite A.J. Terrell. So plenty of reasons for concern. That's what this show's all about.
A lot of them.
The Falcons.
A lot of reasons.
Let's go to the Carolina Panthers. Reasons for concern for the Panthers.
If Bryce Young didn't get any bigger in the offseason, that's still a concern. Now, have you seen the pictures?
Bigger or better?
You seen the pictures? Picture out of it.
Yeah, he looks more cut, more defined.
Apparently. It's one of those ones where, when they show like the throwing motion and it's 2 completely different throws. It's like a 5-yard dump off versus like a 25-yard out where he's firing it.
You were telling me yesterday how you had like cherry pie was in your head and you really easily influenced.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Just like mini camp, you make fun of me for buying into hype before the draft and everything. You are all in on every mini camp.
I'm
or
literally
OTA
explaining
story.
to you why I think the picture is ridiculous.
No, you're buying into it.
There's a picture out there of Bryce Young looking more jacked, but he's in it's the before is Bryce Young just sort of standing there like this, right? And the after is him like mid throw. So of course there's going to be like some muscle definition, right? There's muscles actually doing something in the second picture. Anyway, yeah.
Let's ask Eric, how jacked is Bryce Young this year?
I joked this to you before we came on, but I don't think it's a great dynamic when your analytics nerd is several inches bigger and dozens of pounds heavier than your starting quarterback.
Wow.
I'll just throw that out there.
Wow.
It's not the optimal dynamic if you're, drawing that up.
While we're calling out all of our friends here.
I'm not calling them out. I'm
What
saying
if
Eric's normal size, Bryce Young's not.
I'm going to. What if Eric's math's not that good?
Wow.
What if his math just isn't that good? And he's over there, front office, Panthers.
Man's got a doctorate.
No, I mean, realistically here,
Bryce Young had one of the worst rookie seasons a high draft pick has ever had. Like, there are players that have come out of the other side of that and become good players. Matthew Stafford is one of them. Jared Goff is another. It's happened, but most of them don't. And if he's one of the ones that doesn't, the Panthers don't have a quarterback.
And the question's going to be, did they do enough? They invested heavily at guard, another one of those offensive lines that should be better. It looks like it'll be at least average with all that investment, and Austin Corbett maybe coming back from injury and his history of playing well, playing center. But did they do enough on the offensive line? Did they do enough at receiver, bringing in Deontay Johnson to complement Adam Thielen, bumping Jonathan Mingo down? Xavier Legette as your first-round pick. He was a year 5 breakout, one good season. Nobody was talking about him last year at this time, and he'd had 4 years of college. And again, I know there's reasons for that, but historical precedent statistically doesn't bode well for Xavier Legette. So concerns as far as those playmakers go. And then, as I've said for other teams, just pure pass rushing, man. There's a lot of teams out there with, like, Jadeveon Clowney is the best pass rusher for the Panthers. Jadeveon Clowney has been rusher 2 or 3 on every team he's been on the last few years, and that's been the right role for Jadeveon Clowney. So Brian Burns is out, and there are not a lot of established edge rushers right now for the Panthers.
No, definitely. I mean, generally that defense, that has the capacity to not be a particularly good unit at all. They've lost some pretty key, they've lost a lot of their best players from that defense. Frankie Louvu departed in the offseason at linebacker. Brian Burns, obviously, they moved on from him. Sure, they've kept, Derek Brown's there. Clowney comes in. And J.C. Horn, when he's playing, is a really high-level corner, but doesn't play a lot and hasn't so far in the NFL. So there's definitely that defense could be a problem.
Let's go reasons for concern for the New Orleans Saints.
Their quarterback is still Derek Carr.
I mean, he's good. Derek Carr's good. It's just where's the ceiling there, right? He's in that mid-tier quarterback world where you question what the ceiling is.
That could be an absolute dumpster fire of an offensive line. That's
the concern, right? If Ryan Ramczyk really is not healthy enough.
If he retires, apparently they've flipped Fuaga to left tackle and Penning to right tackle so far in mini camps. If that's what they run with, number one, Penning hasn't shown anything so far to say he's going to be good at any spot. Fuaga playing left tackle instead of right tackle, it's at least adding an element of potential risk that usually isn't the problem, and I don't have an issue with it as a concept, but it's just adding to the pressure on him to play well. And then even if he does, that might be 1/2 of an offensive line okay, and the rest of it is not good.
Yeah, and then so I think the offensive line, if they're going to show improvement from last year, there are some questions there. Defensively, some of their additions, high upside type of additions like Willie Gay, Chase Young. We know what Chase Young is capable of being, but he hasn't really been that for a few years now or ever. Willie Gay, I'm always intrigued by his speed and playmaking, but there's also a lot of plays where he's out of position, especially in the run game. So I think some of those offseason additions for a team that's had to lose a lot of talent the last couple of years, they're asking a lot of guys like Willie Gay, Chase Young to step up and make some big plays for them.
Mm-hmm.
And they're inconsistent.
Yeah. A lot of inconsistent.
The line is the biggest one for me.
The line is definitely the biggest one, I think. There is absolutely, that, if Ryan Ramczyk retires, that offensive line could very quickly completely unspool.
Let's go Tampa Bay Bucks. Reasons for concern for the Bucks.
The biggest one's probably like a Baker Mayfield yo-yo. They're the equal and opposite reaction of what you got last year. What if Baker Mayfield just goes, his entire career appears to be bouncing wildly from one extreme to the other. Last year was, relatively speaking, a really good year for him. What if you get a crappy year again now that Dave Canales has left? What if Dave Canales was the answer? He was the reason Baker Mayfield's career bounced back, and you got the good version. For half the season, his numbers on third down were like out of this world. And it was because he never had to go beyond the first read. Like Canales was just dialing up the answer. The correct answer on third down was the play we were running. Just drop back, look at the guy, hit him, first down. What if that left with Dave Canales and Baker's got to do it all by himself now and it just doesn't work?
I think there's reasonable concerns there. This might be pushing it a little bit, but just Mike Evans got re-signed. Chris Godwin's in the last year, maybe just age-wise at receiver. You know, you always wonder if Evans is going to lose a step at any point. That's always a risk. It might be pushing it a little bit because he's been so consistent.
Yeah.
More specifically, though, both guards, Ben Bredesen and Cody Mock, both grading in the 40s last year, would be a concern. And then cornerback 2, Zion McCollum, probably getting the first crack opposite Jamel Dean. He's more of an athletic projection from the draft a couple years ago who's never really reached that potential, but it's a whole lot of question marks trying to replace Carlton Davis opposite Jamel Dean at outside corner.
Yeah. There's the defensive front, the defensive line is, I think, wildly inconsistent as well so far. Like they have a lot of players that can make impact plays, but they haven't all made them collectively together, and they don't do it as often as you expect them to. So, you know,
impact pass rusher. I mean, Joe Tryon-Shoyinka and Yaya Diaby showed some stuff as a rookie, but it was okay, not great. I know the sacks were kind of there. Randy Gregory, second rounder, Chris Braswell. It's a whole bunch of depth type of players, but not really an impact player. Shaq Barrett, their biggest impact edge rusher over the last couple of years, and he's gone. So
yeah, I think Kalijah Kancey can be an amazing playmaker for them, but hasn't happened yet. Like it's still. It's a work in progress. He's an undersized interior defensive lineman who rushed the passer, I think, in a similar way than we anticipated, but he got mauled in the run game quite often last year. He had a run grade of 29.5.
It was rough, so that he's got to figure that. I mean, that's very similar. Not that bad, but Ed Oliver had that similar career path where he was always good enough rushing the passer, but the down-to-down stuff was inconsistent. All right, let's go to the NFC West. Sorry, Arizona Cardinals. Reasons for concern.
The defense still looks rough.
When does Call of Duty
paper,
come out?
Right? When does Call of Duty come out? That's a good one.
Not one this year.
No? Well, we just had one, right? It was last year when he was working his way back.
I thought they did it every year now.
The defense, I think, is just still – it's just bad on paper. Like, their biggest defensive addition is probably – the signing of a guy that in 2004 would have been a top 5 pick, but right now is just a tweener and a guy without a position and a guy that ran like an edge rusher that runs a 4-5 or runs a 5-second flat 40.
Darius Robinson.
Yes.
Yeah. The defense generally for the Cardinals, defensive tackle.
Where's their pass rush?
You've got the Barbarian.
Yes.
And as much as we love the Barbarian,
yes,
on this show, he could use some help. Can't do it all himself.
Or in fact, just.
Dennis Gardeck.
Just can't do it.
No, he's great. Listen, the defensive line, I read this on draft night. Justin Jones, Bilal Nichols, Roy Lopez, Dante Stills, LJ Collier, Kieras Tonga. It is not a good group of interior defensive linemen. You could throw Darius Robinson maybe into that mix to help it out, but the defensive front, the front 7 generally, is rough. Dennis Gardeck, the Barbarian, is more of a situational pass rusher. Zaven Collins is a linebacker conversion trying to rush the passer. B.J. Ojolari in year 2, he's just been okay. A lot of questions for who's going to be actually playing the run well, but also rushing the passer, of course.
Yeah, you just look at that entire group and you're like, where's the pass rush coming from? The Barbarian, cool, but you're talking last year was a career year for him by a distance, and it was like 40 pressures, right? The top players in the NFL are getting twice that. Where is Zaven Collins, B.J. Ojolari, Victor Dimukeje, Dennis Gardeck, Darius Robinson now, Cameron Thomas hasn't done anything yet. These are the edge rushers and the interior guys you read out. None of those guys are significant pressure monsters either. You look at this entire group, they're 20 players across the defensive front. None of them look capable of getting you 50 pressures in a year.
Other general concern, Kyler Murray played okay coming off of injury, played better in his last couple games. Maybe that was the turning point, but he hasn't really played well since 2021, right? 2022 we graded at 67. Last year he graded at 70. His best 2 grades are 2020 and 2021 with Cliff Kingsbury. So Murray getting back on track, and again the offensive line is just one of those creep back toward average lines that could go either way here. They're not. Jonah Williams is going to come in, play right tackle. He hasn't played his best football in a few years. And there are some question marks up front for the Cardinals. All right, let's go to the Los Angeles Rams. Reasons for concern for the Rams.
An aging Matthew Stafford? Is that
maybe
coming off a bunch of injuries?
Losing Zach Robinson?
Losing Zach Robinson.
You lose Zach?
What if Zach was the brains of their operation?
Aaron Donald's retirement
yeah,
is a real one. Replacing him in the aggregate with some rookies, overhauling that offensive line. Pure pass rush from on the edge. I like what they did with Jared Verse, and they attacked the defensive line with 4 draft picks. But we still don't know what Verse is going to do as a rookie. Byron Young played a lot of football, but was inconsistent as a rookie. Michael Hoyt was 300-pounder, dropped into coverage quite a bit, and not a great pass rusher. So I think pure pass rush is a concern.
Left tackle is, I think, an issue. I mean, Alaric Jackson held up fine last year. Don't know that that's something you can rely on every single year. Left tackle could easily be a concern for this offense, and Matthew Stafford is the kind of quarterback at this point in his career you would imagine kind of needs at least a reasonably high-functioning offensive line.
Yeah, I think that's all fair. Anything else for the Rams? That looks pretty good. I mean, I think the reshuffle of the offensive line overall looks pretty good, but I think, yeah, your point about left tackle specifically is a thing.
The Aaron Donald thing is huge. I mean,
just the residual, his ability to move around, create for others.
Yeah, well,
and what the offense had to account for Donald. Like, you're losing a ton there. You're losing 2 players, basically.
Yeah, you really are. Like, I think what you failed to appreciate late in his career is the impact that he had just by being out on the field, right? Aaron Donald maybe lost a tiny bit of juice the last couple of years, but he was still being game planned for, unlike any other defensive player in the NFL. Like, teams spent the entire week designing that week's game plan specifically around Aaron Donald, right? There were plays that would not be in the playbook because Aaron Donald was out there. There were plays that would be modified specifically to make sure multiple bodies got on Aaron Donald. And, you listen to Donald talk, and he's telling you about how he watches tape to try and get tells for the occasional play that he'll be left one-on-one, because he knew that when that comes along, he has to win and get a sack because he's not going to get another one for 25 snaps, right? So that's gone, all of that. So now a team, the entire game plan for playing the Rams is completely different because nobody, like Kobe Turner's fine. He had a really good second half of the season. Nobody is game planning the same way for Kobe Turner that they did for Aaron Donald. So a whole bunch of stuff that the Rams haven't had to deal with for a couple of years, in fact, a lot of years, are now on the table, right? Teams can run different plays against them. Teams can attack them in different ways. And just the whole dynamic on defense changes.
Those are reasons for concern. All right, let's go to the San Francisco 49ers. We have 2 more teams here. Reasons for concern for the Niners. I'm going to start with defensive line depth relative to the last few years.
Okay.
Losing a guy like Eric Armstead, it's, Nick Bosa is great, but now pass rushers opposite him, Leonard Floyd, coming off of his worst season, Yetur Gross-Matos, Drake Jackson, who's never really come good as a former second-round, really explosive player. I know Javon Kinlaw's not great, but you lose him from a depth perspective. I mean, it looks like the most dependable players are Nick Bosa and Javon Hargrave that you feel good about. When in the past, remember last year they added Chase Young and they had Randy Gregory and they were just deeper. They were just much deeper last year on that defensive line compared to what they are now.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. With all of these Shanahan offenses, the thing is I always come back to the offensive line, which is a weakness on paper. They're really good at making it not be a weakness between the hash marks. But, Aaron Banks, John Feliciano, Colton McKivitz, Jake Brendel, these are all players that can be exploited in any given week. And only really Trent Williams is a high-level player on that offensive line. I still feel at some point that's going to come back to haunt them. Now, again, it's kind of like Kansas City, where the baseline expectation is playoff team, probably in the NFC Championship game, and you're really asking, what is the thing that can stop them winning the NFC Championship and the Super Bowl?
What is right, exactly. And so then I would bring up Brock Purdy and, his ability in crunch time. He's had a lot of good moments. He was inconsistent on the playoff run, though. He wasn't great in the first half of the Packers game. He wasn't great week in, week out in the playoff run. He missed a couple plays in the Super Bowl that could have obviously turned the tide and won a championship for the Niners. Can he make those big plays? Because, again, the baseline for the Niners is they should be competing to go to the Super Bowl once again. What would be the concern?
Got it. Rain. Rain is the concern. Brock Purdy can't pass in the rain. Cleveland game, ball fell right out of his hand. The Green Bay game, rain. Rain's the concern.
Cleveland game.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Rain.
The concern, the reason for
That's
pessimism for San Francisco is what if it rains?
Okay, that's it.
That's your reason for concern.
Speaking of rain, Seattle Seahawks.
Ah, nice.
Reasons for concern for the Seattle Seahawks.
I mean, what if McDonald doesn't just wave a magic wand and the defense is great? Like it's
a lot of turnover on the defense. Might take some time. I mean, it took a few weeks for the 2022 Ravens to get a feel for the new system, so it could take some time there. Offensive line, big question marks on the interior.
Yeah.
Laken Tomlinson coming off of maybe his worst season, one of his worst. New center.
He's also not
Nick
really
Harris,
been good.
Probably.
Yeah. Laken Tomlinson has also basically only been good in the Shanahan offense.
Yeah. That's a concern. Christian Haynes, third-round rookie. I think he'll get a crack at starting at right guard, but he's a third-round rookie. That doesn't always go well, even if he's a good player. So I think there's concerns on the offensive line.
Abe Lucas hasn't played as well as he did early in his rookie season.
Injury
for
issues.
a while.
Battled some injuries. And then I think just Geno Smith generally, if we're talking about expectations for a team, the Seahawks have either been a first-round ousted playoff team or on the cusp of the playoffs over the last 2 years. Is Geno Smith? This would be similar to like Baker Mayfield. Is he enough to push them to the NFC Championship? I mean, that's a reason for concern. Is Geno good enough to take this team above where they've been the last 2 years?
There was a report somewhere that essentially said that Sam Howell was such an alpha personality that the Washington Commanders couldn't possibly expect him to back up the next quarterback. It wouldn't work.
You think he's going to infect the QB room?
The team would gravitate towards Sam Howell so much it would undermine the authority of the true starting quarterback, whoever that proved to be in Washington. So they had to trade him away. They had to get him out of the building. You are too much of a dog for us to keep here as a backup quarterback. We got to get rid of you. For the sake of our franchise, you have to be removed from the equation. The Seahawks just brought that guy in. What if Sam Howell is too much of an alpha for Geno Smith and the rest of the Seahawks to cope with?
Huge concern.
The entire offense is going to be in Sam Howell's basement every week, just game prepping, while Geno's sitting there in the meeting room being like, what the John Travolta meme, right? Where's everybody gone? You know, Geno's out there. He's a leader without a team to lead, which is just a guy taking a walk.
Could be a big concern. Yeah.
Big concern.
The one other realistic one I might bring up, are they too fragile offensively, relying on DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett?
You suggesting that's not realistic?
I am. We didn't lean into the sarcasm as much on this show today. It was much more serious because I guess we were more mocking all of the positive vibes that people are going to have this offseason, and these are legitimate concerns that each team has.
Right.
But the fragility of Metcalf and Lockett, look, I think JSN is good.
Lockett's kind of declining.
Yeah.
I think it'll be a slow burn. He's a really good player, but
I also think we'll get JSN, ready to start stealing some of those targets from Lockett, and they'll be fine. But until we've seen that and, it's been proven, potential concern there. But I think the offensive line, realistically, pass rush, realistically, Boye Mafi's done some good stuff, but opposite him, do they have enough juice off the edge, I think is another concern.
Yep.
Great. Well, good work, man. We did it. Reasons for concern or pessimism across the NFL, all 32 teams. And it's Memorial Day. We appreciate everybody here today listening to us. We appreciate all of our we're thinking of the soldiers here today on Memorial Day and fallen soldiers. So shout out to the military here on Memorial Day. So anyway, what else do we have the rest of the week? I'm leaving.
You're out.
I'm out. So you're on your own on Thursday.
Oh, yeah. Do we figure out what we're doing for that?
Not my concern.
Great.
I'm out of here.
Perfect.
So we got thanks to everybody for tuning in here. Happy Memorial Day. We'll see you again on Thursday with more PFF NFL Podcast.